The homeowner had always taken pride in the simple joys of his property. The front yard was neatly trimmed, the walkway swept, and the flower bed carefully maintained with seasonal blooms. Yet something had always felt incomplete. For weeks, he had been telling himself he would finally replace the old, rusted mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. It had served its time faithfully, but looked weary after years of standing through rainstorms, strong winds, and the occasional accidental bump from passing bicycles. One Saturday morning, after sipping his coffee and admiring the morning sunlight spilling across the street, he decided it was time. He drove down to the local hardware store and browsed the aisles until he found what he had been imagining, a sturdy, stylish mailbox with a sleek black finish and a polished red flag. It looked strong, dependable, and had just the right touch of elegance to complement his home. With a sense of satisfaction, he brought it home, gathered his tools, and set to work. The process of installing the new mailbox became more than just a small chore. It felt like a project that breathed new life into the front of the house. He dug out the old post, smoothed the ground, and set the new one in place with fresh concrete. The sun grew warmer as the hours passed, but he didn't mind. He carefully measured the height, made sure the box stood perfectly straight, and tightened every bolt until it was solid. When he finally stepped back to look at his work, he felt a wave of pride. The new mailbox stood tall and confident, a simple but meaningful improvement. Neighbors passing by gave approving nods, and a few even complimented the fresh look. To him, it wasn't just about mail, it was a symbol of order, care, and the satisfaction of making something right with his own two hands. But not everyone shared the same enthusiasm. That afternoon, Karen appeared. She was known in the neighborhood for always having an opinion, especially when it came to matters of appearance or upkeep. She had a sharp eye that caught the smallest details, from how high the grass was cut to whether a trash bin was left out too long. Today, her attention was fixed on the new mailbox. She strolled up the walkway, a polite smile on her face, but her tone carried its usual weight of authority. "That's quite a mailbox you've put up," she remarked, tilting, her head slightly as if she were inspecting it. "It's different from the others on the street." The homeowner returned the smile and nodded. "Yes, I thought it was time for an upgrade. The old one was falling apart." Karen folded her arms, still staring at the box. "Well, I suppose it will take some getting used to. You know how important it is to keep everything looking consistent around here." Her words lingered in the air, but the homeowner chose not to let them bother him. He had put his effort into this project, and it stood proudly at the end of his driveway. With a polite nod, he thanked her for stopping by, and she eventually continued her walk down the street. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the street lamps flickered on, the homeowner admired his new mailbox one last time before heading inside. He felt content. It was a small change, but it made his home feel refreshed, cared for, and complete. The next morning, however, his contentment was interrupted. Stepping outside with his cup of coffee, he stopped in his tracks. The mailbox he had so carefully installed was leaning to the side, dented and scratched, as though it had been struck or pushed. His heart sank. He looked around the quiet street, but no one was in sight. Puzzled, he walked closer and ran his hand over the fresh dents in the black metal. The red flag hung loosely, bent out of shape. It hadn't been there long enough to suffer from weather or accidents. Something, or someone, had damaged it deliberately. Standing in the morning stillness, the homeowner frowned in confusion. His simple project, which had brought him so much satisfaction only hours ago, had already become the center of a mystery, and though he didn't yet know it, this was only the beginning. The morning discovery of his damaged mailbox left the homeowner unsettled. He had invested time and care into building something sturdy, yet less than a day later it looked as though it had already been through a storm. At first, he tried to convince himself it might have been an accident. Perhaps a delivery truck had brushed against it, or maybe a bicycle had wobbled too close. Accidents happened, after all. Still, the dents seemed unusual. They were not light scrapes, but strong enough to bend the metal and tilt the box on its post. He straightened it as best as he could, though the marks were impossible to ignore. Shaking his head, he returned inside, determined not to let it ruin his day. Over the following week, he replaced the mailbox once more. This time he reinforced the post and double-checked the bolts, telling himself that lightning could not strike twice. Yet only a few nights later, he awoke to the sound of something clattering outside. By the time he opened the front door, the street was empty. The next morning, the mailbox was once again dented and leaning to the side. Now the pattern could not be ignored. Twice in such a short span, his mailbox had suffered the same fate. He thought back to Karen's words the day he had installed the first one, her pointed remark about keeping things consistent. Could her disapproval have something to do with what was happening? The thought left him uneasy. Karen had always been vocal about appearances, but she was also clever in how she expressed her opinions. She rarely said anything that could be taken as more than a suggestion, though everyone in the neighborhood knew she expected her suggestions to be followed. The homeowner decided to stay quiet, at least for the moment. He did not want to accuse anyone without knowing for sure. Still, he couldn't ignore the growing suspicion. Each time the mailbox had been damaged, it seemed to follow one of Karen's visits. She would stop by, make a comment, and not long after, the mailbox would be broken. He tried to brush off the thought, but the timing was too precise to ignore, and the damage was too deliberate to be an accident. The dents were sharp, direct, as though someone had taken an object to the metal. Despite the frustration, he chose to remain calm. He replaced the mailbox again, this time with one that was a bit simpler in design. If the appearance had truly been the problem, perhaps this would resolve it. The new box was plain, painted white with a standard red flag, and matched many of the others on the street. He hoped that making this change would finally bring peace. For a few days, it seemed to work. He checked the mailbox each morning with quiet anticipation, and it stood tall and undamaged. The sight gave him a sense of relief. Perhaps he had been overthinking the situation. Maybe the earlier damages had been random after all. But just as he began to let his guard down, the peace ended. On the fifth morning, he stepped outside to find the plain white mailbox lying on the ground, completely knocked off its post. This time there was no question. Someone had gone out of their way to destroy it. He crouched down, running his fingers over the broken edges. Whoever had done this had used considerable force. The bolts were pulled loose, and the box itself was bent, nearly in half. The sight left him both disappointed and determined. As he stood there, his eyes wandered toward the houses nearby. The street was calm, with neighbors going about their mornings as though nothing had happened. Yet the homeowner knew that this was no random act. There was a pattern, and it was becoming clearer with each broken mailbox. He did not yet have the proof, but deep down, he suspected who might be responsible. For now, he kept his thoughts to himself. But one thing was certain. The mystery of the mailbox was no longer a small inconvenience. It was becoming personal. And the homeowner was ready to pay closer attention. The third broken mailbox felt like a turning point. The homeowner could no longer convince himself it was random chance. He had replaced and repaired, hoping each time would be the last. But the quiet street seemed to have other plans. The repeated damage stirred a mix of frustration and curiosity in him. Someone clearly wanted the mailbox gone, and he was beginning to feel the weight of it. When neighbors walked by, he noticed the way they glanced at the broken post. Some offered polite words of sympathy, while others avoided the subject altogether. It was as if everyone knew something he didn't. The silence only deepened his suspicions, and though no one said Karen's name, Her shadow seemed to linger, in every thought. Karen had a way of making her presence felt even when she wasn't around. She often appeared on her daily walks, stopping to chat with anyone who happened to be outside. Her conversations always seemed casual, yet there was a sharpness behind her words. She might comment on the height of a hedge or the angle of a parked car, and though she smiled while saying it, her tone carried an unmistakable weight of expectation. One afternoon, not long after the latest mailbox had been destroyed, Karen stopped by again. She stood at the end of the driveway, her eyes fixed on the bent metal box lying on the grass. "Oh dear," she said softly, almost as if she were sympathizing. "That poor mailbox just doesn't seem to last, does it?" the homeowner forced a smile. "It's strange, isn't it? This is the third one in a row." Karen tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps it's a sign that a simpler design would work better. Sometimes it's best to keep things uniform. Too much variety can be distracting." Her words lingered like a puzzle. She spoke with the air of someone offering advice, but the homeowner couldn't help but feel the message ran deeper. He nodded politely, but as she walked away, his mind replayed her comments again and again. That evening, as he sat on his porch, the homeowner thought about how the situation had grown. What had started as a small improvement to his home had now turned into a strange battle of persistence. He couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being tested, that someone wanted him to give up on the idea of having a proper mailbox at all. But giving up wasn't in his nature. Instead, the situation only sparked his determination. If someone wanted to make this a challenge, then he was prepared to meet it. The following weekend, he decided to install another mailbox, this time with more care than ever before. He set the post deeper, secured it with stronger brackets, and chose a design that was both sturdy and modest. As he worked, he noticed Karen strolling past again, her eyes flicking briefly to his project before she offered a small smile. She didn't stop to comment this time, but her silence felt just as pointed as her words had been. When the new mailbox was finally in place, the homeowner stood back and admired it. He told himself this one would last. Still, a part of him couldn't shake the thought that he was waiting for something to happen. Each morning, he stepped outside with a mix of hope and apprehension, checking the box before doing anything else. For several days, everything remained untouched. The mailbox stood strong and unbothered, and the homeowner allowed himself to relax. Perhaps the cycle had ended at last. But on the seventh day, as the sun rose over the rooftops, he stepped outside, to find the box slightly dented again. Not destroyed, but marked just enough to show that someone had tested it. The sight confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't over. Someone was watching, waiting, and continuing the strange game. As he touched the dented corner, the homeowner's resolve hardened. Whoever was behind this had underestimated him. The pattern was clear now, and if it continued, he intended to be ready. For the first time since the trouble had begun, he felt a sense of quiet confidence. The tension had grown, yes, but so had his determination. And soon he would discover the truth. The homeowner had reached a point where patience alone was no longer enough. The mysterious dents and broken mailboxes had become too frequent to ignore. Whoever was behind the trouble seemed determined, and the only way to end it was to finally uncover the truth. One evening, as he sat on his porch with a notebook in hand, he began planning. He considered every possibility, waiting outside through the night, asking a neighbor to help, even calling for advice, but none of these seemed practical. If the culprit was bold enough to damage his mailbox multiple times, they would not be easily discouraged. He needed a way to catch them in the act, without them knowing they were being watched. The idea came to him while scrolling through an online store. He paused at the listing for a small outdoor camera, barely noticeable once installed. It was motion-activated, weatherproof, and could send alerts directly to his phone. It was perfect. With a quiet determination, he ordered it and waited eagerly for it to arrive. When the package came a few days later, he wasted no time. Under the cover of dusk, he carefully set the device near the mailbox, hidden among the shrubs at the edge of his yard. He tested it several times to make sure the angle was right, adjusting until the view captured both the mailbox and the surrounding sidewalk. Once satisfied, he stepped back with a feeling of relief. Now he could finally watch without being seen. The first night passed quietly. He checked his phone in the morning and found only recordings of passing cars, a neighbor's dog, and the soft rustle of tree branches in the breeze. Nothing suspicious. The second night was the same, filled with ordinary movements but no sign of trouble. On the third night, however, his phone buzzed with a motion alert just after midnight. He quickly tapped the screen, his heart beating faster as the recording began to play. At first, the image was calm, showing only the street lamp's glow and the shadows it cast across the driveway. Then, a figure appeared. It was Karen. The camera showed her moving slowly down the sidewalk, glancing around as if to be sure no one was watching. She paused at the edge of his yard, staring at the mailbox with the same focused look she often wore during her neighborhood walks. After a moment, she stepped closer, holding something in her hand. With a sudden motion, she struck the side of the mailbox. The loud clang of metal filled the recording. She struck it again, then quickly walked away, her expression unreadable in the dim light. The homeowner watched the video twice, then a third time, his mind racing. The suspicion that had been quietly building inside him was now confirmed. Karen was the one behind it all, yet instead of anger, he felt a surprising sense of calm. At last, he understood the pattern. Every dent, every broken post, every comment. About keeping things uniform. It all pointed back to her. The mystery was no longer a puzzle, but a clear picture. The next morning, he sipped his coffee while looking at the slightly dented mailbox. He felt different now. The damage no longer frustrated him because he finally knew who was responsible. What mattered next was how he would handle it. He considered his options. He could show the footage to a few neighbors, letting the truth spread quietly. He could confront Karen directly, though he doubted she would admit anything. Or he could wait for the right moment to let the truth come to light in a way she wouldn't expect. As he thought about it, a small smile formed. Patience had gotten him this far, and a clever plan would take him the rest of the way. He didn't want a simple confrontation. He wanted a lasting solution, something that would end the mailbox trouble once and for all. For now, he would keep the video safe, watching closely and waiting for the perfect chance. Karen had played her game in secret, but soon the tables would turn, and this time, the surprise would be hers. Knowing the truth gave the homeowner a sense of power he hadn't felt before. For weeks, the mailbox trouble had left him puzzled, but now the mystery was solved. He had proof of Karen's late-night visits and the image of her striking his. Mailbox was saved safely on his phone. The question wasn't who anymore, it was how to respond. He spent several evenings replaying the footage, not out of frustration but out of curiosity. Why would Karen go to such lengths over something so small? Perhaps it was her desire for control, or maybe it was simply her way of keeping things exactly as she liked them. Whatever the reason, the homeowner knew that confronting her directly would not bring peace. She might deny everything, twist the story, or even find a way to turn the situation in her favor. What he needed was a solution that spoke for itself. Something clever, undeniable, and effective. The idea began to take shape as he stood in his garage one evening, looking at the collection of tools and spare materials he had gathered over the years. His eyes fell on a stack of leftover concrete, mix and some pieces of heavy steel pipe. A thought sparked. If Karen wanted to keep testing his mailbox, then he would let her, but on his terms. He sketched out a plan on an old notepad. The design was simple but strong, a mailbox that looked ordinary from the outside but was built like a fortress on the inside. The post would be reinforced with steel, set deep in concrete, and the box itself would be lined with metal plates that could withstand even the heaviest strike. To anyone walking by, it would look like a normal mailbox, but to anyone attempting to damage it, it would feel like hitting a wall. The next weekend, he put his plan into action. He mixed the concrete and poured it into a deep hole, securing the steel post so firmly that it felt like part of the earth itself. He then attached the mailbox, carefully lining the inside with strong plates, making sure it still appeared ordinary from the outside. By the time he finished, the sun had dipped low in the sky, casting golden light over his handiwork. He stood back and admired the result. The mailbox looked simple, neat, and unremarkable, exactly what Karen would expect. But he knew what lay beneath. It wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a quiet trap, waiting for the next attempt. For the next few nights, he waited with quiet anticipation. Each time his phone buzzed with a motion alert, he checked the recording eagerly. For a while, there was nothing unusual. Just neighbors, walking their dogs, children riding bikes, and the occasional passing car. Karen, it seemed, had kept her distance, but patience had become his greatest tool. He knew her habits well enough by now to trust that she wouldn't stay away forever. She had tested him too many times already. It was only a matter of when, not if, she would strike again. As he waited, he found himself smiling at the thought of what might happen when she did. This wasn't about revenge. He had no desire to see her hurt, but about balance. She had pushed the situation again and again, and now she would finally realize the mailbox was not so easily moved. On the fifth night, just after midnight, his phone buzzed. The alert lit up his screen, and he quickly opened the live feed. There she was, Karen, moving quietly along the sidewalk, just as she had before. She glanced around, then approached the mailbox with a familiar object in her hand. The homeowner leaned forward, watching closely. She lifted the object and swung hard against the side of the box. This time, the sound was different. Instead of the hollow clang of dented metal, the strike echoed with a sharp, solid crack. Karen flinched, shaking her wrist in surprise, clearly not expecting the resistance. She tried again, with the same result. The mailbox didn't budge. On the camera feed, her expression shifted from confidence to disbelief. She stepped back, staring at the mailbox as though it had betrayed her. Then, with a quick glance around, she hurried off into the night. The homeowner sat back with a quiet chuckle. His clever idea had worked exactly as planned. The mailbox still stood unmarked and unshaken, while Karen's surprise had been caught on camera. For the first time in weeks, he felt fully at ease. The game had changed, and now he was the one in control. The night Karen finally tested the reinforced mailbox marked the turning point in the quiet struggle. The homeowner had been waiting for this moment, watching through his phone as the motion. Camera captured her failed attempt. The way she recoiled after the first strike told him everything. She had expected the mailbox to crumble like the others, but this time, her efforts had met a wall. The next morning, the mailbox stood proudly, untouched and upright. There were no dents, no scratches, no signs of defeat. For the homeowner, it was more than just a victory for his project. It was a silent declaration that he would no longer be an easy target. He replayed the video several times, each viewing, showing Karen's surprise in sharper detail, the quick shake of her wrist, the way she leaned in to inspect the mailbox, the hasty retreat. It was a performance she hadn't intended anyone to witness, yet now it was captured forever. For the first time since the trouble had begun, the homeowner felt calm. He no longer had to wonder who was responsible or how to protect his mailbox. He had built something that could withstand her persistence, and he had the evidence to prove her actions. Still, he chose patience over haste. He didn't rush to share the video or confront her directly. Instead, he watched. The reinforced mailbox, had become a test not only of strength but also of character. Would Karen try again, or would the shock of her failed attempt keep her away? For several days, nothing happened. The mailbox stood tall, unchallenged. Neighbors walked by and admired its sturdiness, some even commenting on how well it suited the home. The homeowner nodded politely, though inside he knew the real story. To them, it was just a mailbox. To him, it was proof of resolve. But Karen's silence was unusual. She had a rhythm to her behavior, a pattern of comments and appearances that everyone in the neighborhood had grown accustomed to. When that rhythm broke, the homeowner grew curious. He wondered what she was thinking, whether she was planning her next move, or whether she was quietly nursing the surprise she had received that night. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of gold and orange, he saw her walking down the street again. She paused near his driveway, her eyes lingering on the mailbox longer than usual. She didn't say a word this time. Instead, she gave a polite smile, the kind that carried more meaning than her words ever did, before continuing on her way. The homeowner recognized it for what it was, a silent acknowledgement. She knew the mailbox had beaten her, and though she wouldn't admit it aloud, her expression had spoken enough. Yet he remained cautious. People rarely changed overnight, and he doubted Karen would simply give up so easily. He kept checking his camera each night, alert for any unusual motion. Each buzz of his phone brought a rush of anticipation, but for now it was only ordinary scenes. Passing cars, neighbors returning from late errands, children chasing fireflies under the glow of street lamps. Still, he couldn't help but smile. Each time he walked past the mailbox, it stood as more than just a receptacle for letters. It had become a quiet monument to persistence. Every morning, as he collected his mail, he was reminded that patience and clever thinking could turn even the smallest battles into victories. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to withdraw slightly. She still walked the neighborhood, still chatted with others, but her comments no longer carried the same edge when directed at him. It was as though the mailbox itself had silenced her in a way no argument ever could. The homeowner knew, however, that the story wasn't finished. The reinforced mailbox had shifted the balance, but the real resolution had yet to come. He had the footage, the proof, and the patience to use them when the time was right. For now, he was content to let Karen wonder. The mailbox had already delivered its first surprise, and he was saving the second one for a much larger stage. The homeowner had waited long enough. For weeks, Karen's secret trips to his yard had been captured on his camera, each one adding to the quiet story he was keeping. The reinforced mailbox had already delivered her the first surprise, but now it was time for the second, one that would end the matter entirely. He chose his moment carefully. The next neighborhood gathering was approaching, and he knew most residents would attend. These gatherings were always the same: polite chatter, small updates, and plenty of conversation about lawns, paint colors, and seasonal decorations. Karen usually led the discussion, her voice carrying through the room as she shared her reminders and suggestions. This time, however, the spotlight would turn in a direction she never expected. When the evening arrived, the homeowner walked into the community hall carrying nothing more than his phone and a quiet sense of purpose. The room buzzed with the usual conversations as neighbors greeted one another. Karen stood near the front, speaking cheerfully with a small group, her voice confident and familiar. The meeting began smoothly. Updates were given, small matters discussed, and plans for the upcoming neighborhood fair were outlined. The homeowner waited patiently, saying little, until the conversation turned toward property concerns. As usual, Karen guided the topic. "We've had several issues with maintenance lately," she said, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "It's important that everyone take extra care with their homes and surroundings. Consistency keeps our neighborhood beautiful." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the homeowner, though her words were meant for everyone. He felt the subtle weight of her comment, but instead of shrinking back as he might have weeks ago, he leaned forward slightly. It was time. Speaking of consistency, he said calmly, I'd like to share something unusual that's been happening at my property. The room grew quiet. Heads turned toward him, curious. Karen's polite smile stayed fixed in place. The homeowner unlocked his phone and mirrored the screen onto the small projector the group often used for announcements. A video began to play. At first, the footage showed nothing but the glow of a street lamp and the stillness of the night. Then, a familiar figure appeared. Gasps rippled through the room as Karen walked into view, glancing around before striking the mailbox. The sharp sound of metal rang out, followed by her startled reaction and quick retreat. The recording ended, and silence filled the hall. Karen's smile faltered. She shifted slightly, her hands tightening together. That, she began, her voice unsteady. That can't possibly be. But before she could continue, the homeowner played another clip. And another. Each one showed the same pattern. Karen approaching under the cover of night, damaging the mailbox, and walking away. The evidence was clear, undeniable, and complete. The room erupted into murmurs. Neighbors whispered to one another, some shaking their heads, others looking at Karen in disbelief. The homeowner said nothing, letting the videos speak for themselves. Karen finally tried to respond, her voice rising slightly. There must be some mistake. The angle, the shadows, it isn't clear. But the clarity of the images told a different story. The recordings left no doubt, and the room knew it. For once, Karen's usual confidence slipped, replaced by a rare silence. The homeowner leaned back in his chair, calm and steady. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't accused, hadn't argued. He had simply shown the truth. And in that moment, the balance shifted completely. By the end of the meeting, the conversation had turned away from him entirely. Neighbors spoke, quietly among themselves, some offering sympathetic nods his way, others avoiding Karen altogether. She left early, her steps quick and her expression tight. The homeowner remained until the end, chatting easily with a few neighbors who admired how he had handled the situation. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight lift from his shoulders. The game was over, the mystery solved, and the truth revealed for all to see. As he walked home under the glow of the street lamps, he glanced at the mailbox standing tall at the edge of his driveway. It had endured every attempt, and now it stood, as more than just a container for letters. It was a symbol of patience, cleverness, and quiet strength. And as for Karen, the surprise she had never expected was now behind her. A surprise that would not be forgotten by anyone who had seen it. The days following the neighborhood meeting carried a different feeling. For the first time in weeks, the homeowner could step outside without the weight of suspicion on his shoulders. Each morning, he strolled down his driveway, coffee in hand, and collected his mail from the strong, gleaming box that stood proudly at the edge of his yard. There were no dents, no scratches, no tilts in the post. The mailbox seemed to share his sense of relief, standing firm as if it knew the battle had been won. Neighbors, too, seemed to carry a new energy. A few stopped by in the mornings offering kind words and a smile. Some congratulated him on how he had handled the situation. Calmly, without anger, letting the truth speak for itself. Others admired the cleverness of his reinforced design. The mailbox, once a source of frustration, had become a small symbol of resilience that the entire street quietly respected. Karen, meanwhile, had taken a step back from her usual routines. She still walked through the neighborhood, but the sharp comments and lingering glances that had once defined her presence were gone. Her steps were quieter now, her conversations shorter, her eyes less commanding. Though she never spoke of the meeting, everyone knew the surprise she had received that night still lingered. The homeowner noticed the change, but he didn't dwell on it. His goal had never been to embarrass her, it had only been to protect his home and his peace. In the end, he had done both. The mailbox trouble had ended, and the street itself seemed calmer, as if the tension that had once hung in the air had finally lifted. One weekend, he decided to host a small gathering in his backyard. Nothing grand, just a simple barbecue with neighbors, laughter, and the warm smell of food filling the air. It was a way to celebrate not only the resolution of his own challenge, but also the strength of the community when honesty was allowed to shine. As the sun set, a few of the neighbors teased him good-naturedly about the legendary mailbox, calling it the toughest box in town. He laughed along with them, happy to let the story become part of the neighborhood's shared memory. What had once been a point of stress was now a story told with lighthearted humor, a reminder of how patience and creativity could turn conflict into a lesson. Later that evening, as the guests departed and the yard grew quiet again, the homeowner found himself sitting on his porch, watching the street under the soft glow of the lamplight. The reinforced mailbox stood steady at the end of his driveway, its polished surface catching the faint shimmer of the moon. He thought back to how it all began, with a simple wish to improve his property. Who would have imagined that a small project could spark such a challenge? Yet, through the ups and downs, it had taught him something important. Sometimes the best way to handle conflict wasn't through loud arguments or heated words, but through patience, strategy, and letting actions speak louder than intentions. The neighborhood was quieter now, more balanced. Karen had retreated into the background, no longer the center of every discussion. The homeowners, once cautious in her presence, now spoke more freely with one another. A sense of ease had returned, and the street once again felt like the friendly, welcoming place it was meant to be. As he finished his evening tea, the homeowner smiled. The mailbox still stood, stronger than ever, but it was no longer the focus of his thoughts. Life had returned to its gentle rhythm, the kind of peace he had wanted from the very beginning. In the end, the surprise he had given Karen was not just the strength of the mailbox or the videos at the meeting. It was the reminder that quiet determination could outlast even the most persistent challenges. And for him, the greatest surprise of all was how something so small had taught him the value of patience, resilience, and the quiet power of standing firm. The mailbox was more than just a box now. It was a symbol, and every letter it held in, the days ahead would remind him of the peace he had worked so carefully to create.